She returned $500 million that was mistakenly transferred to her to the billionaire. This act gave birth to a love story, the return that stole his heart. When $500 million fell into her account overnight, Elizabeth didn't see a miracle. She saw a test. Across the city, a lonely billionaire would soon discover that honesty can be the beginning of love. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're tuned in and ready to dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. The world outside Elizabeth's small apartment was still gray when her alarm buzzed. She rubbed sleep from her eyes, silenced the cracked phone screen, and exhaled. Another 12-hour shift awaited at St. Mary's Hospital. The kettle hissed, the same tune it played every morning. Her life was simple, predictable in its struggles, but there was peace in her discipline. When she checked her bank app to pay an overdue electricity bill, her heart froze. $500 million. For a moment, the room went silent. The kettle continued to hiss, but Elizabeth couldn't hear it. She blinked twice, refreshed the page, and felt her pulse race. "This must be a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. The temptation came like a whisper from another life. What if it isn't? What if it's a sign? A blessing after years of struggle? But deep down, Elizabeth knew. Her late father's voice echoed in her mind. Integrity isn't what you do when it's easy. It's what you do when no one's watching. Her hands trembled as she called the bank. Across the city, Maxwell Hartman stood before the towering windows of his penthouse, a skyline of glass and rain behind him. He was power personified, clean-cut, immaculate, yet undeniably empty. His morning meetings blurred into noise. His assistant's voice cut through. "Sir, there's been a system glitch. $500 million was accidentally wired out of your account last night." He didn't flinch. "Trace it." It landed in a personal account belonging to Elizabeth Moore. He sighed. Another problem, another human error. Yet something about the name lingered. Hours later, Elizabeth received a call from a corporate representative from Hartman Industries, confirming her suspicion. She explained she'd already contacted the bank to initiate a reversal. Her honesty surprised the man, who promised Maxwell would be informed immediately. That evening, she sat by the window, city lights flickering like broken stars. She should have felt relief, but instead, a strange sadness settled in her. She had just turned away from what could have been freedom, comfort, a new life. Yet her conscience was calm. Meanwhile, Maxwell reviewed her case personally. His company had seen fraud, lawsuits, manipulation, but never something like this. "She didn't touch a single cent?" he asked. "No, sir. She returned it immediately." He leaned back, intrigued. "Find her. I want to speak to her myself." The next morning, Elizabeth stepped out of her apartment, umbrella in hand, heading for her bus stop. A sleek black car pulled up beside her. A man in a tailored suit stepped out and said, "Miss Moore? Mr. Hartman would like to meet you." The name struck her, the billionaire. Inside the car, her mind raced. Why would he want to meet her? Was he angry? Suspicious? The rain painted the windows with silver streaks, mirroring her thoughts, clear yet uncertain. When she entered the Hartman Tower's marble lobby, she felt like an imposter among suits and polished shoes. The elevator rose endlessly. On the top floor, Maxwell waited tall, composed, eyes sharp yet haunted. Their first meeting was brief but unforgettable. "You returned my money," he said, his tone more curious than grateful. "It wasn't mine to keep," Elizabeth replied simply. Something in her tone, steady, sincere, broke through his practiced indifference. "Do you have any idea," he asked softly, "how rare people like you are?" Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Maybe, But I wasn't trying to be rare. Just right. For the first time in months, Maxwell smiled, a small, genuine one. As she left, he found himself watching the elevator doors close, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years, the kind that didn't come from money, but from faith restored in humanity. That night, as Elizabeth returned to her tiny apartment, she replayed his words, unsure why they mattered. Across the city, Maxwell poured a glass of wine he didn't drink, staring out into the storm. Somewhere between them, something had begun quietly, like a heartbeat under thunder. What would you have done in Elizabeth's place? Keep the money or return it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Elizabeth didn't expect to hear from him again. After returning the money, she imagined her part in that billionaire's world was over, a brief, moral footnote in someone else's empire. But fate had other plans. 3 days later, her phone buzzed while she was on break at the hospital. The number was unknown. She hesitated before answering. "Hello," a deep, composed voice replied. "Is this Elizabeth Moore?" "Yes." "Who's calling?" "This is Maxwell Hartman." She froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. The same Maxwell Hartman whose company logo she saw every day on billboards and skyscrapers. "I just wanted to speak to you personally," he said, his tone calm yet deliberate. "To thank you for what you did." "It was the right thing," she answered softly. "Anyone would have done the same." "I don't think so," he said. "Not in this city." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, but charged. Elizabeth could hear faint rain tapping against his end of the line. It felt oddly intimate, like she was standing there with him, both suspended between words. Maxwell cleared his throat. "I'd like to meet again, properly this time. No lawyers or assistants." She hesitated. "I don't think that's necessary. You don't owe me anything." "That's just it," he replied. "Maybe I do." Her chest tightened. Something about the way he said it, low, uncertain, made her wonder what debt he was really referring to. That evening, she stood before the mirror, debating whether to go. Her reflection looked tired but sincere. "You're not doing this for money," she whispered to herself. "Just curiosity." When she arrived at the rooftop restaurant Maxwell had chosen, she was greeted by a warm amber glow and the quiet hum of a live piano. Maxwell stood by the window, dressed simply but impeccably, his usual corporate armor softened by something unspoken. "Miss Moore," he greeted, rising. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "This is a little overwhelming." "I understand." He gestured for her to sit. "Would you like some water?" "Wine." "Water, please." They exchanged polite words at first about the hospital, about his company, about how mistakes like the transfer even happen. But gradually the conversation shifted. "You seem very composed," Maxwell observed, watching her with quiet fascination. "Most people would have panicked. $500 million could have made anyone forget their morals." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Maybe. But peace of mind's worth more than that." He leaned forward. "You really believe that?" "Yes." She met his eyes. "Money can buy everything but peace." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the rain started again, painting the glass with glimmering streaks. Maxwell found himself studying her expression, the steadiness in her eyes, the kindness in her tone. It had been so long since someone spoke to him without an agenda. He asked, "Have you always been this honest?" She laughed lightly. "It's not always easy. Honesty gets you hurt sometimes." Maxwell's smile faded slightly. "Yes, it does." For the first time, Elizabeth saw something behind his composure, a flash of pain, raw and familiar. She wanted to ask, "Who hurt you?" but stopped herself. When the dinner ended, Maxwell walked her to the elevator. "I don't usually do this," he said quietly. "But I'd like to see you again." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Why?" He met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because when you returned that money, you returned something else I'd lost a long time ago: faith in people." The elevator doors slid shut, but not before she caught the faintest smile tugging at his lips. That night, Elizabeth lay awake, staring at her ceiling, heart pounding. This wasn't supposed to happen. Gratitude wasn't supposed to feel like connection. Yet, somewhere inside her, a warmth had begun, gentle but undeniable. Across the city, Maxwell sat in his study, her laughter echoing in his mind. For the first time in years, he didn't pour himself another drink. Instead, he looked out at the rain and whispered to himself, "Peace of mind. Maybe she's right." Do you believe love can begin from something as simple as gratitude, or is that just fate disguising itself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For a week after their dinner, Maxwell didn't call. Elizabeth told herself that was fine, even good. Men like him didn't belong in her world, and women like her didn't survive in his. Still, when her phone buzzed, she found herself glancing at it, hoping to see his name. Every night she scolded herself. "You met him once, Elizabeth. Don't be foolish." At the hospital, she drowned herself in work: long shifts, difficult patients, quiet corridors that smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Yet, sometimes between tending 4 drips and comforting families, her mind wandered to that rooftop dinner, to his eyes softening when she smiled. Across the city, Maxwell sat in his glass office, signing contracts that suddenly felt meaningless. The echo of Elizabeth's words, "Peace of mind's worth more than that," played like a broken record. He tried to focus on quarterly reports, on acquisitions, on meetings full of men who measured worth in profit margins. But everything they said sounded hollow. He realized, almost painfully, that he hadn't felt genuine conversation in years until that night. Yet, fear crept in. "You can't get close to her," he warned himself. "She's too pure. And you ruin everything you touch." The ghost of his late fiancée lingered, betrayal still bleeding quietly inside him. He'd been a fool once. He wouldn't be again. A week later, Elizabeth's face appeared on morning television. The story had leaked. Nurse returns $500 million to Billionaire, the most honest woman in the country. Her photo flashed beside his. Reporters speculated, twisted, embellished. "She must have done it for fame," one anchor joked. "Or maybe he rewarded her," another said slyly. Elizabeth turned off the TV, cheeks burning. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with interview requests and social media pings. She declined them all, wishing she could vanish. At Hartman Industries, Maxwell watched the same broadcast in silence. His assistant looked uneasy. "Should we make a statement, sir?" He shook his head slowly. "No. Let it die out." But it didn't. Within hours, paparazzi were outside Elizabeth's apartment, shouting questions about her relationship with Maxwell Hartman. She hid behind her curtains, heart pounding. Why couldn't good deeds just stay good? That evening, her phone rang again. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Moore," Maxwell's voice said, heavy and regretful. "I'm sorry. This shouldn't have happened." "It's not your fault," she said, though her voice trembled. "People will forget soon enough." "No," he replied. "They won't. Not unless I do something." "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. "Let me handle this." 2 days later, a statement appeared on every news site. Elizabeth Moore is not affiliated with Hartman Industries. She returned the funds purely out of integrity. She declined all financial compensation. Maxwell Hartman. Elizabeth read it with mixed feelings. Gratitude, yes, but also distance. The line between their worlds had been drawn clearly in public ink. That night, She sat alone on her balcony, hugging a blanket around her shoulders. The city below hummed with life, cars, lights, laughter. Somewhere in that same skyline, Maxwell was probably doing the same, looking out at everything he owned and feeling just as alone. She whispered into the night, half prayer, half confession. Maybe some lives just aren't meant to touch. At the same time, Maxwell stood in his study, staring at her photograph on the news site. He traced her smile with his gaze, kind, unguarded, almost unreal. He wanted to call her, to tell her she deserved better, to say that her honesty had changed something in him. But his fear stopped him cold. Instead, he turned off his phone and walked toward the piano he hadn't touched since his fiancée's death. His fingers trembled, but the music came soft, hesitant, like hope rediscovering its voice. And though Elizabeth didn't hear it, somehow, she felt it, a strange calm washing over her. Two souls in separate rooms, both believing they should stay apart, yet both aching in silence. Do you think love can truly cross worlds between power and simplicity, wealth and humility? Or are some hearts destined to stay apart? Tell us what you feel in the comments below. The storm came not from the sky but from headlines. A gossip site released a photo of Elizabeth walking near Hartman Tower, claiming she'd secretly received a financial settlement from Maxwell. By morning, her hospital supervisor called her into the office. "Elizabeth," Mrs. Green said gently, "we're receiving calls. Reporters, sponsors, even donors. They're saying you took money from Mr. Hartman." Elizabeth's stomach twisted. "That's a lie." "I believe you," her supervisor sighed. "But until this settles, I think it's best you take a short leave." A short leave, 2 words that felt like a lifetime. She left the hospital with tears biting her eyes, clutching the small cardboard box of her locker belongings like it was her only proof of decency. Across town, Maxwell was livid. "Find the source," he barked at his PR director, "and shut it down." The man hesitated. "It's spreading too fast, sir. The only way to control the story might be to rewrite it." Maxwell's jaw clenched. "What do you mean?" "Announce a partnership. Make it official. If the world believes she's part of your foundation, the rumors die. People love redemption stories." He paused, thinking. It was manipulative, yet it could protect her. He hated using image tactics, but for once it wasn't about his reputation. "Draft the statement," he said quietly. That evening, Elizabeth's phone buzzed again. "Miss Moore," Maxwell's voice came through, calm but urgent. "I need to see you, please." When she arrived at his office, her exhaustion was palpable. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Hartman, whatever this is—" "I know," he interrupted. "You've been dragged through the mud because of me. I can fix this." "You can't fix gossip," she said bitterly. "People believe what they want." He met her gaze. "Then give them something better to believe." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a breath. "Work with me at my foundation, temporarily, as a public relations advisor for our healthcare outreach. The world will see you're not a gold digger, you're a partner in charity. And it's the truth, isn't it? You care about helping people." Elizabeth blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You want me to work for you?" "Not for me," he said softly. "With me." Her instinct screamed no, that it was too close, too complicated. But then she thought of her suspended job, her empty apartment, and the endless stream of hateful comments online. Maybe proximity was survival. "Just until this clears," she said at last. "Just until then," Maxwell agreed. But both of them knew just rarely stays that simple. Their first week working together was awkward. Maxwell was precise, structured spreadsheets, meetings, goals. Elizabeth brought warmth to every discussion. When he focused on efficiency, She reminded him of empathy. When she doubted her worth, he praised her insight in ways that made her blush. One afternoon, while reviewing proposals, Maxwell noticed her pause by a photo on his wall, him shaking hands with his late father. "He built the company," Maxwell said quietly, "and I built the walls after he was gone." She turned to him gently. "You don't have to keep them up forever." He smiled faintly. Old habits. That smile, faint, cautious, but real, was the same one that had haunted her since their first meeting. As days passed, the office air grew warmer, charged with something unsaid. One evening, after a long shift, she found herself walking by the old park near Hartman Tower. It was the place she'd once sat, clutching the check she returned. The beginning and end of everything. She sat on the same bench now, her heart heavy with the weight of all the what-ifs. A little girl ran by chasing a red balloon, tripping and falling. Elizabeth hurried to help her up. The child smiled tearfully and said, "Thank you, miss." Something in that simple gratitude broke her. She watched the balloon float away and whispered, "Maybe I let my own happiness fly too." The next morning, Maxwell made a decision. He drove without direction for hours through neighborhoods, past hospitals, into quiet streets until he found himself in front of the clinic where she worked. Through the glass, he saw her bent over a patient, her hair tied back, her movements tender and sure. She looked peaceful, whole even without him. His instinct was to turn away, to protect what little pride he had left. But something deeper, quieter, stopped him. He realized pride had already cost him everything once before, first Anna, now Elizabeth. He wouldn't let it take her too. That evening, as the clinic closed, Elizabeth stepped outside into the fading light. She froze when she saw him standing there, raincoat draped over his arm, eyes searching hers like a man walking out of a long storm. "Maxwell," she breathed. He took a slow step closer. "I didn't come here to fix the headlines. I came to fix what I broke." Her throat tightened. "You didn't break me, Maxwell. Just my trust." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Then let me earn it back. Not with words, but with truth." She folded her arms, trembling slightly. "Truth." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I was afraid. You saw me, the real me, and that terrified me. I thought pushing you away would keep me safe. But it only made me empty." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "Do you know what I prayed for, Maxwell? Not that you'd come back, just that you'd heal. That whatever hurt you carried would stop deciding your life." He swallowed hard. "It's strange. That's what your love did. It didn't make me invincible, it made me human again." They stood there in the dusk, silent except for the faint sound of traffic and wind. Elizabeth finally whispered, "And what if I can't go back to how things were?" He stepped closer, his voice low and trembling. "Then we don't go back. We start again." Her tears fell freely now, but her smile broke through them like dawn. Maybe forgiveness wasn't forgetting what had happened. Maybe it was choosing to see love as something worth rebuilding. She took his hand, hesitant, fragile but real, and for the first time in weeks Maxwell smiled. "Does this mean I get a second chance?" Elizabeth's laugh came through her tears. "You get one as long as you remember you're not saving me. We save each other." Do you believe love deserves a second chance after betrayal or doubt? Tell us below, could you forgive someone like Elizabeth did? The morning after their reunion at the clinic, the city awoke to new headlines, not scandal, not gossip, but truth. Billionaire apologizes publicly, credits nurse for restoring his humanity. The foundation released a heartfelt statement written not by Maxwell's PR team, but by Maxwell himself. "Elizabeth Moore reminded me that wealth means nothing if you lose your heart. Her integrity changed not just a company, it changed a man." Elizabeth read it from her small kitchen table, her hands trembling around her coffee mug. The words weren't grand. They were honest. And for the first time, honesty was enough. That evening, Maxwell arrived at the clinic again, but not as a CEO. No guards, no press, no expensive suits. Just a man in a simple shirt, holding a small envelope. She met him at the doorway, cautious but smiling. No headlines this time? He grinned softly. No headlines, just this. He handed her the envelope. Inside was a letter of donation $5 million to rebuild the hospital wing she once worked in. But beneath it, a handwritten note said, "Consider this not a gift, but a thank you for teaching me how to give without expecting anything back." Her eyes filled with tears. "Maxwell, I don't know what to say." He stepped closer. "Say you'll let me stay in your life. Not as a story, not as a billionaire, just as a man who finally knows what love means." Elizabeth laughed through her tears. "You always did know how to make an entrance." He smiled. "And this time, I'd like to stay after the curtain closes." The days that followed were quiet but golden. Maxwell visited the clinic often, not as a sponsor, but as a helper. He carried supplies, read to patients, and even let Elizabeth teach him how to change bandages. One afternoon, an elderly patient whispered to Elizabeth, "That man your husband?" Elizabeth blushed. "Not yet." The woman chuckled. "Then hurry. Life's shorter than we think." Elizabeth smiled. Maybe she was right. Weeks later, Maxwell invited her to the rooftop of Hartman Tower, the same building where their fates had first intertwined. The evening sky blushed orange and purple, the city humming softly beneath them. As she stepped out, she noticed something strange. The rooftop was empty except for a small piano and a trail of white lights leading toward it. Maxwell stood there, waiting. "I thought you might like to hear that song again," he said. She smiled. "The one you stopped playing?" He nodded and began to play the same melody from that night in his office, only now fuller, steadier, alive. When the last note faded, he turned to her. "Elizabeth Moore," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "you returned something worth far more than money that day. You returned my soul. And I can't imagine a future without you in it." Her breath caught. "Maxwell." He knelt, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Will you marry me not because I'm a billionaire, not because of headlines, but because I finally understand what forever means?" Tears shimmered in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. As they embraced, the city lights flared like constellations, and the wind carried the faint hum of traffic and laughter below. Maxwell looked into her eyes. "Do you remember what you said that day? That returning the money was the right thing to do?" Elizabeth nodded with a smile. He cupped her face gently. "I finally understand. Love isn't about keeping what we're given, it's about returning what we find in someone's heart." She laughed softly through her tears. "Then I guess we both returned something precious." Later that night, they stood by the railing, watching the city pulse with life. Elizabeth leaned against him. "You know, I never imagined all this from a bank mistake." Maxwell smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Sometimes mistakes are just destiny in disguise." What would you have done if $500 million landed in your account by mistake? Would you return it and believe it could lead to love? Tell us below. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.